Is RS and GIS application for groundwater monitoring and management. It will be delivered by Dr. KBV and Fanindra, Associate Professor, Department of Civil Engineering, IIT Hyderabad. Fanindra, thank you. Now you can take over the session, Fanindra. I think you can. The time is from 2:30 to 3:30, Fanindra. After that, we have valedictory function.
Okay, sir. Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Fanindra.
And can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So, first of all, I'm sorry. Actually, my original presentation is scheduled yesterday, but for some personal reasons, I could not present yesterday. And the title is also slightly a bit more elaborative on remote sensing and GIS applications in water resources and agriculture, because I thought this is actually more apt for this topic. So briefly what I do, I will give a brief introduction to remote sensing, introduction to GIS and the functionalities, GIS functionalities and applications. Then I will go with major 5 case studies and applications. One on watershed delineation and as a processor to the hydrological models, as an interface to hydrological models, whereas GIS for groundwater monitoring mainly, and GIS for mainly agriculture in terms of again to specific to crop classification. So remote sensing, I don't need to tell because we are in the last day. People, you might have known that actually it's actually the process of inferring something about anything without any physical context. Again, remote sensing is a very broad topic, but we refine or we restrict the definition of the remote sensing to observe the features on the surface or the near surface features without any physical context. So remote sensing is anything telling about the features on the surface or the near surface. And again, we restrict remote sensing to the satellite remote sensing, where the satellites or the sensors mounted on the satellites are predominantly used for observing the features on the surface of the earth. So by now you may be knowing that for remote sensing, there are 4 components. Major 4 components are the parts. One is energy source. The source of the energy could be a passive energy. That means it is not the target which is actually radiating. So it is actually the sun. For example, if the sun's radiation is actually hitting on the target that is available, or the electromagnetic radiation is enabling us to visualize the object. Or it can also be an active remote sensing, where radar based pulses will emit their own energy to detect the object. So that means you don't need any sun or these things. So for example, same thing, you take the image. If I take the photograph of you in the morning, that says a passive remote sensing, because sun's radiation is actually allowing you to identify my camera. But if I take the same image in the night, what I do, I will switch on the flash of my camera. That means actually my camera is actually releasing the energy to detect the object. Such a kind of remote sensing is called as a radar or active remote sensing. The transmission path from the source to the target, okay, the transmission path mostly the atmosphere, because for a satellite, okay, the atmospheric portion is the main transmission path for the electromagnetic radiation to happen. The target is actually the feature that you are observing on the earth or an ocean body, and the sensor is actually the one which is detecting the image. So by now you may be knowing that predominantly remote sensing uses the visual and near infrared bands of the electromagnetic spectrum, right? Predominantly we use visual and NIR bands, because for most of the other bands actually atmosphere will not allow the energy to pass through that one. So the satellite data, mainly the problem with satellite remote sensing is, okay, you have to correct the images, mainly because 2 things are moving. The earth is moving from west to east and satellite is moving around the earth. So when you are taking the image from a moving body onto a target, which is again situated on a moving body, there will be the interaction of the 2 moving bodies, which has to be accounted, or the corrections you have to apply. The sensor drifts. Sensor drift mostly is mainly because of the sensor with the age will keeps giving the systematical error which could be replaced, or changes in the atmosphere of the cloud conditions, because the images that you are taking in the visible and near infrared that are mostly does cannot pass through a thick clouds. So when there is a thick clouding information, then your image may not be accurate. So you may have to correct the images to account for the changes in the atmospheric conditions. So the corrections that you generally apply for a remote sensing image broadly under radiometric corrections, where you correct the radiometric or the spectral values or the digital numbers of an image or the data that is captured by the image, or the geometric correction where you correct the position or the placement of the objects on the image. Okay, so broadly you can see the top left figure is completely gives an overview of how a remote sensing technique generally works. Even the where actually the sun is actually as a passive source is releasing the electromagnetic radiation, and that energy is hitting on the targets and reflecting back to the sunlight satellites, and the satellite is actually recording the data. For example, the amount of reflection from the objects will be different for a vegetation, for a water body, for a grass, for bare soil, for a road, built up area, buildings, and so on. So the nature of the reflected energy
Sir,
will. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
your PPT is not visible, sir.
Oh, really?
It's not moving. It is on the first slide itself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's in the. Can you see the slide with 4 photographs?
Yes, sir.
Right. Thanks.
Now
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so if you see the top left figure, the top left figure is all about actually the functionalities of the remote sensing. See the electromagnetic radiation from the sun is hitting the targets and it is reflected back to the satellites, and the reflected energy is being sensed by the satellites. The amount of reflection is depending on the nature of the surface, whether it's a tree or water body or grass or bare soil and so on. Again, the amount of reflection is also based on the particles in the atmosphere, because some energy is actually scattered, some energy is actually absorbed, some energy is reflected, or and so on. So I'm talking about the right side top figure. The amount of energy that is being sensed by the sensor is changes from object to object and also depends on the nature of the atmospheric conditions. So once if you see the bottom left figure, the energy source is from the sun hitting the target and then reaching the satellites. Whatever the satellite captures the image, that will be sent to the ground station. The ground station in a radio bands it will be sent, and these satellite images which are actually collected from the satellites will be analyzed for a given application. So this is the whole remote sensing component in one go. Again here this is all about the geometric correction what I discussed in the previous slides. So the spectral positions, you generally take a Survey of India map or maybe other locally surveyed maps to represent the spatial features on the satellites. Can you see my next slide?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. So the satellites that are used in remote sensing broadly you can classify into two categories: Earth observing satellites and environmental satellites. Earth observation satellites, the property of this one is they will have a less revisit interval. That means they revolve around the Earth very fast and they see the same position in a very shorter time. They have a very high spatial resolution. Spatial resolution means they can observe the Earth features at a very high spatial resolution. For example, your Google Earth image right? Which has approximately spatial resolution of close to 1 to 3 meters, depending on the location. Similarly, environmental satellites will have a high revisit interval, but low spatial resolution. So from this, you may be knowing that by now you may have to compromise on the revisit interval or the spatial resolution for your application to be served. And what are the images that are processed from the remote sensing? You can use them for terrain applications like deriving slope, aspect, drainage patterns, and so on. Hydrological applications to represent the precipitation, stream networks, watershed delineation, and all. Soil characteristic representation to represent the moisture distribution, texture distribution, and so on. Geological representation to delineate lineaments, faults, and so on. So for example, if you see here, this is the Earth. This is actually the low Earth orbits. The low Earth orbits actually they will be revolving at a low height, which has a altitude of 450 to 900 kilometers. And these are the medium Earth orbits, which are mostly you will use for the terrestrial applications. These are actually the high Earth orbits, which are mostly applied for the navigation or mainly the environmental applications. So if you see here the constellation of the European satellites, the low Earth orbits, medium Earth orbits, and the high Earth orbits. Mostly these are used for meteorological applications. This is the Copernicus for mostly for the terrestrial applications. These are mostly for research based applications, the low Earth orbits. So around the Earth, you will have generally mostly you can broadly divide into three Earth orbits: low, medium, and high, depending on whether your application is a research or terrestrial or the environmental. So again, these are actually the sensors. Generally, broadly, you can classify into four categories. The coarse resolution satellites. If you see the coarse resolution, the spatial resolution is very, very low. For example, almost 1 kilometer is actually spatial resolution, 250 meters to 1 kilometer or 2.5 to 5 kilometers for AVHRR, MODIS or Meteosat. But the advantage is actually the temporal resolution is very, very low. That means they will visit the same place every day. For example, most of the environmental applications, for example, cyclone movement or actually the wind circulation pattern applications and so on, generally they do not require the information at a very fine scale, but they want actually the changes monitored at a very, very free time, temporarily at a high frequency. For that, you generally use a coarse or low resolution satellites. And then multispectral sensors where for example, Landsat images, for example, these are mostly used for terrestrial applications, which has a reasonably good spatial resolution, like for example, 15 meters panchromatic or 30 meters multispectral or 5.8 meters if it's resource sat and so on, but they have a very low temporal resolution. That means they visit the same place every 16 days, 1 month, and so on. Particularly for terrestrial applications, you are not really bothered about daily visit interval, because if my interest is actually observe the land use changes or crop changes and so on, even 10 days free revisit interval is sufficient for me. High resolution satellites, which are mostly the commercial satellites like Iconos, Worldview, Cartosat, Planet, QuickBird, and so on, which satisfies the both needs. Like they have a very high spatial resolution and also almost very high temporal resolution. Generally, these are mostly used for urban planning and all applications where a very high spatial resolution is very much important. And the fourth category is hyperspectral sensors, where you will like Hyperion, which takes the image in many spectral bands like 200, 220 and so on, so that actually you will have very fine narrowband images for various applications. Then what's next after remote sensing? So you know that remote sensing is predominantly is for getting the satellite imageries, process them and collect the data. If you don't know anything about them, you just simply approach NRSA in Hyderabad to get the processed images. I can get a processed Cartosat image, I can get a processed QuickBird image, anything by just simply purchasing or There are open source platforms, I can get them. Okay, I have my processed images. Then what I have to do? What's next? What are you going to do with those images? It's the GIS which helps you in using the remote sensing images. It's not only the remote sensing images, but also many other input data sources to solve a particular geospatial problem or an application. GIS is all about actually inputting, storing, editing, retrieving, analyzing, and outputting the geographically referenced data. So if I have any data which has something related to geography, that is something related to spatial information or spatial context associated with that, then our GIS may help us to go ahead with analyzing the data sets. So the rapid growth of GIS and its applications in many fields have resulted in multiple definitions. For example, okay, GIS applications sprawls in multiple domains like geography, biology, ecology, and so on. Of course, including what engineering. Okay, so that is why it has multiple definitions. Okay, in short, GIS is a simple collection of a computer hardware and also the software system to manage the spatially referenced data. Anything you can call as which has the hardware to mainly to accomplish the functionalities and the software mainly to represent and navigate the spatially referenced data is you can define as a GIS system. The satellite images which are derived from different sensors, they have to be standardized in GIS because different satellite imageries or different systems will bring the images, spatial images in different systems, and you have to ensure everything is projected onto a one unique coordinate system. And GIS, they can consider the data in multiple formats, like it can take a text file, comma separated value file, an Excel file, a proximal files like data from sensors, automatic weather station, a remote data like satellite data sets, a raster data like scanned images, photographs, and ASCII image, kind of a text files, binary files, JPEG, and so on. So the good thing with GIS is it can accept the data in multiple formats. Only thing is you have to ensure that it has something related to spatial coordinates or spatial representation. So GIS tools, you can call it as an open source tools where actually they are publicly available like GrassGIS, QGIS and so on, or commercial or proprietary where like ArcGIS and so on. So GIS mostly data generally you take from ground survey. For getting the GIS images, you may need the data from topography sheets, geological maps, GPS data, and so on. Or you may also need data from point remote sensing like weather station data, sensors and all, or aerial remote sensing data such as satellites, radars, and so on. And the quality mainly depends on how accurately you are getting the data, time, scale of the data, and the completeness. And data representation, you can represent either in vector formats, which is more like an intuitive representation, like actually using a points, polylines, or polygons, or raster format, which is mostly in a form of two-dimensional grids or grid cells to represent the same features. So this is all about actually GIS is something more like actually you have many layers that each one represents a uniform property like land use property, the streets properties and parcels, land use, elevation and so on. You collect everything to represent the GIS function features. The beauty of the GIS is apart from your spatial information, even your text information or the attribute information is also proportionately linked so that any change or modification or editing to a table will reflect in the map or a map will reflect in the table. So you can develop a models, GIS models like this to solve your problem. GIS can also help in delineating the drainage network map. So there are a number of tools, a number of functionalities or applications in GIS like measurement tools, which mostly work on point data or line data or polygon data mainly to measure number, count the number or densities, sinuosity, the curvatures, shape, area, perimeter, and so on. So all the standard measurement components can be obtained using measurement tools. You can also perform classification tools mainly to work on the rasters to reclassify the image from one resolution to the other and so on, or interpolate or extrapolate the data sets. Terrain analysis where you derive the get the elevation data sets. Once you get the elevation, you can generate the slope map, viewshed map, contour maps, drainage map, and so on. The topology tools mainly to know about the connections, the connectivity. What is next to me, what is inside me, what is the proximity to me. So most of the GIS functionalities, knowingly or unknowingly, you may be using. For example, you open the Google Maps and you identify all the nearest hotels. That is nothing but a neighborhood analysis. So it's a form of a topology tool where actually you perform a neighborhood analysis to identify the features. Statistical tools to mainly to classify the data and get the statistical parameters. Geoprocessing tools mainly to perform the spatial analysis, like actually extracting something or editing, tracking, performing the network analyst. Even for example, if I want to go from one place to another, the network analysis tool will work. Spatial arrangement tools mainly deal with the placements, ordering and concentration of various objects. Overlay tools mainly to keep one thematic layer on the other. Retrieval tools to retrieve the spatial and attributed data stored. Modeling and simulation tools to perform various simulation models in GIS. So there are a number of tools in GIS which can be used to perform a lot many applications on spatial maps and also its attributed associated data sets. For example, there are a number of applications you can see for land use mapping. I can use for pipe network representation, identifying the damage and then identifying the alternate networks. Road bridge construction locations, I can use GIS or bicycle path mapping, crime patterns, identifying the crime patterns, or if I want to locate a new tower, what is the most suitable area for new tower location here? Water quality modeling, surface water quality modeling, least cost path. If I want to go from one location to another, considering the elevation data set, maybe an hilly terrain, it can do that one. Urbanization, location for the new stores. Say suppose if Amazon want to have a new store in a city, what is a good location? So that what is the service area polygons, like how much area it can serve. So based on that, you can take a call, shortest route algorithms, sources of contamination and so on. These are all the few of the many GIS applications that you can do. Now, say that, okay, I can see a lot many GIS applications in management or a business community, locating a new tower or going from one location to other using Google Maps or new cell tower location and so on. Then when applications are mostly in the management and business community, why we are discussing about the GIS applications in water resources or agriculture? Of course, the answer is GIS applications sprawls around all the domains which has something to do with spatial and elevated maps, but knowingly or unknowingly, business people are smart enough to use the GIS resources for developing applications or tools suitable to public interests. So for that reason, you might have seen most of the GIS functionalities nowadays in many of the public domains less into water resources. I will stop 1 minute here with GIS applications in water resources. I just want to know, is there any communication lag or slight change and so on?
Okay, everything is okay, Swami. You can continue.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, let me quickly go where GIS can be applied in water resources domain. GIS can be used for watershed management. Okay, so for example, there is one watershed, whether it's a healthy watershed or an affected watershed, what is the health of the watershed, or if I want to plan for new check dams, if I want to plan for new water conservation structures, if I want to plan for new some other structures in a given watershed, how can I do? GIS will help you. Next, mapping hydrological variables. For example, I collected the hydraulic conductivity distribution in a region at some point locations. But I need the hydraulic conductivity distribution for the entire region, like a kind of an interpolation. Or I collect the SPT values or maybe other point data using some field experiments. But I need the information over the entire region. So GIS can help you in mapping those hydrological variables. For example, I get the precipitation only at the rain gauge stations. But if I want to know the precipitation maps or temperature maps or any other meteorological variables, I can use GIS. The next application is hydrologic modeling, where actually you may be using your GIS as a processor for your hydrological simulation for rainfall runoff modeling, or maybe flood routing, or maybe the reservoir routing, or you call it contaminant transport modeling, where actually you will use the GIS mainly for analyzing the transport of the contaminants, either from the surface water or the groundwater resources, by monitoring the data and then coupling with various transport models. Flood modeling studies, flood management studies, what is the risk associated with the flood, or what is the depth of inundation, all those things you can analyze. Similarly, in agriculture also, GIS has a lot many things to do. Particularly for cropland mapping, where if you want to do the crop classification, for example, there is a lot of crops, there are a lot of crops in my area. I want to quickly know what is how many areas rice is cultivated, cotton is cultivated, and all. For crop classification, you can use GIS. Whether the crop is growing healthily or not, is there any stress in the crop? Those things you can sense it from GIS applications. Irrigation scheduling and water management. How much time I need, what time I have to supply water for the crops, or what is the depth to which I have to supply the crops. Those things you can clearly sense. Crop yield estimation, where you can also analyze the yields, and effective management of the crops, where precision irrigation or smart irrigation techniques you can apply, and developing the DSS mainly to help a farmer in understanding the functionalities. So quickly I will go. The first application is GIS for watershed delineation, where you may be knowing that watershed is an area of land which feeds all the water into that is happening or falling in a given catchment into the outlet or the drain points. So outlet is basically the lowest point of the watershed through which water leaves the system, and it combines with other watersheds to form a network of rivers and streams to progressively drain the water. So for example, you will have a initial first order stream joining to second order stream and so on. Finally, it is joining to a stream which ultimately discharges out of the catchments through the outlets. It's all the in single input that is mostly required for your catchment delineation or watershed delineation is the topography. If you have the topography with you, you can sense actually you can get the watershed representation, and simply what you do, use the water balance equation. So all the inflows which are precipitation, and if irrigation is also there, then P plus I should be equal to the stream flows, evapotranspiration, and the change in storage. This is broadly how a watershed looks like. Okay, so watershed is mostly a leafy type structure. Watershed is like this. All the water actually falls and enters through this stream and mainly enters the mainstream, which is eventually discharges to the downstream sites. Can you see the presentation?
No, sir.
Can you see the presentation now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. This is how actually a watershed looks like. You have a precipitation that is actually entering into the system, ET leaving the system, and runoff leaving the system. And simply you will apply this balance equation. So originally what you do, you first identify the contours, whether they're actually contours are closing towards this center or actually diverging like this. And based on this, actually from here, actually you have a diverging contours. That means up to this, the contours are closed. Beyond this, they are going away. So this will represent the boundary of the watersheds. and these are actually that represent the flow of directions which are eventually reaching the outlet of the surface. The same in a digital representation, the elevation values you can see it here, and you can actually plot the contours using this elevation value datasets. Generally, you use an elevation model. Maybe you can use an SRTM DEM at 30 meters or 90 meters spatial resolution, 3D representation of the terrain surface, and DEM is the main source of the for watershed delineation or representation. And DEM can be obtained using at 1 arcsecond or 3 arcsecond or 30 meters or 90 meters spatial resolution. And see, if you see DEM looks like this, if you take a small area and zoom it in, then you will understand that okay, it contains the elevation data. Elevation above the mean sea level, this is how actually the elevation has been discussed or distributed. Then the same thing I will explain here in the steps. For example, you take a simple 3x3 roving window, and these are the elevation values. Say for example, here it stores 80, 74, 63 and all. First it takes the center pixel. So from the center pixel, it first identifies the flow direction. For that actually it requires the steepest gradient. In which direction the flow happens? You know that it cannot happen the flow in this directions because those neighboring cells are at a higher elevation. So the lowest elevation from the center is 48. So the flow direction happens like this. So here, what is the slope? Y2 minus Y1 by X2 minus X1. So Y2 minus Y1 means 67 minus 48. The distance is, this is 30, this is 30. So this will be 30 square root 2. This is called D8 algorithm because you are considering D8, directions 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can also consider D4 algorithm where the central pixel can go only in the east, south, west or north directions. Okay, so based on this actually this is the steepest descent because water cannot flow like this because this is a D4 algorithm. Using D4 algorithm, this is actually the slope. So what you do for each cell, you will actually see the in what direction the flow is happening. So for this, it is happening like this, happening like this. It's very simple. You consider that particular cell at the central pixel and see which of the neighboring 8 pixels are having the lowest elevation. That is the direction in which will flow happens. So for this cell, this is the steepest distance, steepest distance, steepest distance, steepest distance, steepest distance, and so on. And what you do here, based on this D8 algorithm, you have given these values. For east direction, you will give 1. Okay, for southeast, you will give 2. For south, 4. Southwest, 8. Southeast, west, 16, and so on. What is the logic behind this one? 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. What is the logic?
It's basically the beat value, you can say.
So it's a doubling actually.
It's something like that. If you see 2 power 0 is 1, 2 power 1 is 2, 2 power 2 is 2, 4, 2 power 3, 2 power 4, 5, 6, 7. Because it mainly works in a binary system. It considers the 2 power 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for showing the directions. Yes, it is doubling with respect to the previous one. So from there it will create the grid network. How it will create the grid network? This is actually the directions it is calculated for each cell. From this, if you observe this cell, if you see this, the water is coming like this and then going like this, right? And then going like this and then going like this. So obviously this is the lowest point of the catchment because any water which is there, it's being collected here. Any water which is coming here like this, being collected here. Any water is coming like this. This water is coming like this. This, and so on. So from this actually you will create the grid network. Once you create the grid network, you have to get the flow accumulation.
Sir, I need some clarification. Actually, you said what is the reason for identifying all these direction as not in 1 to 8, there are 8 directions totally. So
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4. That could be one way of giving the direction name. Why
Right.
one is using 1, 1, 2, 4, 8? Why is this necessary?
Because the algorithm can only understand the numbers, sir. Algorithm cannot understand the direction, so algorithm can only understand the numbers.
No, that is fine. But 1, 2, 3, 4 also it can understand, no?
No. The problem is actually it's very easy because it's a you are working on an 8-bit system. So what is 2 power 0 is what? Simply 0 0 0 0 0 1. What is 2 power 1? 0 0 0 0 1 0. What is 2 power 2? 0 0 1 0 0. Right? You understand? See, it occupies the least space because the space utilized by these binary operators will be least if you represent in two power fractions, right?
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, for that reason.
And secondly, I think it would be more appropriate to say that the flow will be occurring in the direction of maximum slope and not
Yes.
necessarily towards the lowest height. It will depend on the slope, not height per se.
Yes, of course. You are
So
very
here,
right.
yeah.
Very good. So the point here is it is not actually the difference in the elevations, but is actually the highest slope, which is actually results in the flow direction. Agreed.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for the points. And here, once you have the flow directions created for all the cells, then you will accumulate actually like this. For example, this is actually the main stream. From this you can very clearly sense. Okay, this is actually my lowest point of the catchment, and this is actually the main stream, and these are actually the tributaries that are actually joining the mainstream. So this is very similar to what you have seen here. So this is actually the mainstream. These are the tributaries and so on which are joining. So same thing you can actually get from the same watershed delineation map. Now the flow accumulation, for example, here this is the first cell because water is not coming from any other cells. So the flow is not being accumulated. So this is zeros. From the starting cells will always be represented as zeros. Then here the flow is accumulated from this cell, and this cell. So you are getting a value of 3 here. For example, this cell flow is accumulating from this cell and this cell. So it is 2. For this one, the flow is accumulating from 3 plus another one. This is 4 plus 2 plus 1. So 7. 4 plus 3, 7 plus another 3 here and another one here. So this will be 11. So this is how actually the flow accumulation values are being calculated. The starting cells are shown as zeros, and how many cells are contributing to a downstream cell is represented as that number. So you can define a threshold. Maybe you show only the flow accumulations which has a threshold of 5 cells or more.
Padindra.
Yes.
How it was 11? The central one was?
This one, sir.
Go to the back slide.
This one.
Yeah.
This one.
Yeah.
This cell.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I will explain from here, sir, actually, because that's the same thing. For this cell, this is accumulating from how many cells? From here, 4 cells are coming to this cell. Because these 3 plus this cell. So total will be 4. Let me see if I can use. Sir, this is one cell. This is one cell. This is one cell. Total 3. And this is another cell 4, which are coming here, right? Similarly here, this is 1, this is another one, this is another one. So total 3 are coming like this. Similarly, 3 are coming from this. So total will be 4 plus 3 plus 3, 10 plus this is also coming. So the flow is being accumulated from 11 cells. If you come
Okay,
here,
thank you.
okay.
Okay, thank you. I could
Ah,
understand.
Sure, thanks. So this is how the flow accumulation is calculated by the algorithm. Once you have the flow accumulations calculated, then you can define the threshold, because this is a small grid. If you take a area of a mandal or a district, you will have a lot many flow accumulation cells, and you may not want to showcase a very low first order cell, first order tributaries or second order tributaries. Then you define a threshold only to showcase those particular cells, so that these are the main stream points, main higher order streams, which are actually contributing to this particular outlets. So the same thing, this is how actually you represent the main threshold values to represent. See, for example, this is how actually the tributaries are represented. The same tributaries are represented based on the threshold values and the outlet using the watershed delineation map. So because probably you might have seen in the top previous days, watershed delineation is one of the very crucial steps in GIS, because if you have an elevation map of a village, mandal and so on, you just see flow directions, grid network, flow accumulation, and then the threshold wells, and then you get the watershed delineation map. Next, second application, GIS is also used for hydrological models. For example, GIS, the very good thing with GIS is it is very good in dealing with spatial or non-spatial data sets. If I want to do some mapping or analysis or retrieval on the maps, I can very quickly do with GIS. Okay, hydrological models on the other way, they simulate for enough techniques or the flood modelings or Saint Finance equations, continuity momentum equations, shallow water equations, and so on, right? So if GIS is coupled to hydrological modeling, because most of your hydrological data sets requires spatial representation of the input data sets that can be prepared with GIS, or most of your hydrological model outputs generally are in the form of spatial databases, which could be simply quickly analyzed using the GIS. That is why GIS has gained more popularity by combining with these things in a loose coupling manner, where in a loose coupling is the case where you separately run your GIS model, you get the data and supply to the model, and the model output again you take it to GIS and then you perform the analysis. A tight coupling situation where there is an automation between the two, where the output from the GIS model is automatically taken by the input to hydrological models, and output from the hydrological model is automatic without any user intervention. Embedded coupling is a way where you develop your hydrological model itself using a GIS coding language, so that the entire thing is given. Because in a tight coupling, maybe your GIS coding all developed in Python, maybe your all hydrological simulation could be done in C or Fortran and so on. There may be some compatibility issues which can be resolved with embedded coupling. GIS is an efficient tool in importing, creating, editing, converting the map layers for use with the hydrological models. GIS is effective in managing the time invariant data sets, which does not vary with time, like exactly hydrostatic boundaries, the aquifer boundaries, hydraulic heads, parameters, mainly model parameters and so on. Time variant properties, which generally changes with time, also can be effectively represented with the GIS, like groundwater fluxes and the variable aquifer storages and so on. GIS can be used for hydrological modeling, for physical models, hydrological data sets you can use, meteorological data sets like precipitation, temperature and so on you can use. For example, this is one processing tool that one of our project students have created for ModFlow. They created the BAS package. You have to create in ModFlow like this. The layer property package you have to create like this, or the discretization package you have to create, generate boundary you have to create like this. That means without GIS, you have to create the input files using the Notepad or WordPad like this. But with a GIS, the same files you can very simply create by mapping those things and representing those features in various polygon colors or points or lines. These are points, you have the lines along the boundaries here and so on. So GIS is very good in doing all those things. GIS is very good pre-processor for hydrological models for preparing the land use maps, for elevation maps, runoff maps, slope maps, and so on, or can also be used for your distribution networks, mainly to represent the network features. Third one, GIS can also be used as an interface to hydrological models. For example, instead of using GIS as a processor, pre or post processor, you can also use GIS as an interface. That means you can visualize everything, run the model, analyze everything in GIS itself. For example, visual mode flow, ArcSWAT, and so on, where you represent all the features in the GIS itself. Where, for example, ArcSWAT or a QSWAT, where you doesn't need to worry about the GIS component, because GIS component is embedded into that your hydrological models in such places. Where ArcSWAT means ArcGIS application of the SWAT, or QGIS application of the SWAT, and so on, to solve the hydrological equations. For example, GraphGIS mainly for image processing, analysis, and so on. For watershed analysis and all, you can use the GraphGIS. HECRAS, HECGeoRAS, mainly where you will use it for flood mapping, 1D, 2D, and study analysis to map the flood inundation zones or the flood risk assessment areas and so on and all. The next application, is GIS for groundwater. So remote sensing, you know that it is mainly for observing the surface features or the near surface features. Then what is the role of GIS in observing the groundwater? Because you may have a question that groundwater is available deep in the ground and your remote sensing satellites can only see the top surface, at the most top 20-30 centimeters, because their depth of the penetration is not higher than 20-30 centimeters. Then how remote sensing can help for groundwater level monitoring or fluctuation monitoring? Then the interesting answer is, instead of the direct estimation, groundwater is mainly estimated indirectly from a satellite called GRACE, the Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment Station. So here the GRACE, the whole objective is actually to identify the gravity changes, gravity anomalies at a very, very high resolution, measurement accuracy of 1 microgal, very, very high. So GRACE is something more like actually a twin satellite system, where you will have two satellites which are actually moving around the Earth at a very precise distance apart. Okay, if there is any gravity pull from the Earth, then the satellite is slightly attracted by the Earth, so that the shift in the very slight shift in terms of the micrometers can be sensed by the instruments on board the GRACE, and those changes are related to the gravity changes, and the gravity changes are related to the water changes. So that's a very interesting application where GRACE mission can use, it uses twin satellites, and the inter-satellite distance and their positions are very, very effectively monitored using the radar telemeter, and mainly used in the form of terrestrial water storage changes, because any change in the gravity pull to a satellite is because of the changes in the terrestrial water storage components, and that can be sensed by the GRACE. So essentially the simple water balance equation that is applicable is groundwater storage anomaly is equals to terrestrial water storage anomaly minus change in soil moisture, canopy water storage, soil water, and so on, storm water equivalents. So using this simple water balance equation, you can calculate the groundwater storage anomalies, and
Sir, just a
yes.
query here.
Yes.
You know, we are presuming this gravity anomaly to be exclusively due to presence of water. Is that a right assumption?
Very
Because
good.
gravity
Good
anomaly
question.
can be due to some other factors also.
Right. See, it's a very good question. The major gravity pull by the satellite is because of the changes in the terrestrial mass, and most of the remaining components can be analyzed in a systematic manner, and which can eventually result in the left out component, which is called the surface water changes only. Okay, so it's a good question. Your question is something like actually there will be other significant components of the ground masses which are resulting in this one. So those components are predominantly systematic, which will be systematically eliminated only to result in the terrestrial water storage anomalies.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, it's a good question. So
I would
eventually,
like to suffix to your answer.
yes,
Sir, the geological processes are not happening within these limited time, 10 years or so.
right.
So the change in the gravity due to geological processes cannot be depicted within 10 years. Suppose something,
Right.
some earthquake takes place or something, this type of something activity takes place, then you know that this is the change in the gravity, a change in the mass is due to that. So just this, with the help of this method, whatever Farindra is stating, you can very easily find out the change in the water mass with the help of this technique using this GRACE satellite data.
Yes, agreed. So essentially two things. One is actually the temporal interval of such changes could be high or the systematic, so that actually you can eventually will result in the only terrestrial water storage anomalies. Terrestrial water storage is something like actually consider a water column that is actually extending throughout the earth mass or earth structure. It could be equivalent to the surface water, snow water, canopy water storage and all, from where actually you can also estimate the groundwater storage anomaly as a residual of all other components. Okay, generally, rather than estimating the absolute values, you are considering the anomalies. Anomalies are something more like actually their deviation from their long-term means. The deviation from the long-term means are generally considered to estimate the anomalies. So one of our students has applied the GRACE data sets to analyze the groundwater levels in 4 major river basins. These are the 4 river major basins. One is the alluvium basin, and another is actually the the semi consolidated sandstone basin, and the next one is actually the Deccan Trap basaltic aquifers, and the fourth one is actually the consolidated granite gneiss complex. So considering these four, we consider 4 different hydrogeologic settings and first observed how the terrestrial water storage changes were happening, varying in the GRACE. And then we incorporated this, we considered the GLDAS data, and also we used the MODIS data to get actually various other parameters like ET, precipitation, surface runoff, and so on. And then we observed the storage anomalies in all those features. And then we use 2 algorithms. One is random forest and another is multilinear regression to downscale these terrestrial water storage anomalies and then finally to get the groundwater storage anomaly as a residual of water balance. Once we have the groundwater storage anomalies, then we validated our methodology using the water storage anomalies observed by the central groundwater boards to see to what extent this model is doing better. And the observations is actually the seasonal variations are pretty much sensed effectively. And if you see the correlation coefficient is pretty much reasonably 0.5 to 9 across the entire basins of the alluvium, basaltic and crystalline. So these 3 basins we are able to sense the images or the GRACE is working very good nice except the sandstone basin. So we consider few predictor variables and see their influence on the downscaling methodology. And GRACE derived groundwater levels are observed to be in agreement with the observations at 3 out of the 4 basins except the sandstone basin. And is there any? I have 2-3 more minutes. Shall I continue, sir, or?
Yeah, Fanindra, you can continue. No issue.
I will continue.
I will let you know. I will let you know.
Sure.
Okay.
I will finish in 3-4 minutes, sir, maximum. The next application is crop classification, where we can use a number of indices, spectral indices derived from the visible or optical or the NIR bands to assess the health of a crop or subclasses of a crop and so on, the germination or actually the condition of a crop, harvesting stage and so on. Your mostly NDVI and EVA are the two indices that are generally predominantly used for analyzing the crop conditions. For example, the spectral signatures of different crops will be different. For example, the spectral signatures is very deviating in this band. So an image taken in these bands will be more effective in differentiating citrus from tomato, from sorghum, from cotton. Similarly, from the health of the crop also, you can see a healthy crop. See here, all the three graphs are close, whereas here all the three graphs are very far away from each other. So if I take an image, that is good to get the image in 1.7 micrometers band is much helpful in analyzing the crop based on the condition. Similarly, the emerging conditions, the temporal factors also you can sense using the applications. So one of our students have actually used Sentinel-1 datasets, various Sentinel-1 derived SAR datasets, synthetic aperture radar datasets, to see if the crop classification can be done. She has used dual polarization, copolar, sigma VV, and cross polar, sigma VH, and the ratios and the RVS. And she has used some algorithm to see if the algorithm can best suited for crop classification. Instead of Euclidean basin, so they consider a dynamic time warping algorithm. This is the study area they have considered and observed that the temporal patterns using various the spectral bands. Then this is how actually the crop classification has been done. Okay, this is the distance matrix which tells you whether how accurate your classification is. This is the users and producers accuracy that will tell you how accurately you have correctly mapped the ground pixels or how effectively ground pixels were represented on the map.
Sir, can you just tell a little bit about DTW method?
Yes.
It's being different from Euclidean. Euclidean
yes.
I can understand, but then DTW.
Okay,
how?
let me tell you let me give you a small story. Okay, what happens in Indian scenario is actually say for example, in a village there are 10 farmers who are going for paddy. All the 10 farmers will not sow the paddy on say suppose June 1st. Assume June 1st is actually the onset of monsoon in that region. One will go on June 1st because he assumes that there will be heavy rains in the second week. One will go on June 4th. One will go on June 10th. One will go on June 15th. That means there is a high temporal variability in the patterns for the same crop in Indian scenario, which is mostly does not happen in other scenarios. Okay, for that reason, what happens if I compare my spectral matching pattern with the existing ground patterns, I cannot map like this. I cannot map like this one-to-one like Euclidean because my temporal representation of your matching pixel or matching parcel and the temporal signature of your training parcel are not the same, the starting and ending. Obviously, you will come across with such a situation in Indian scenario where you have to map the temporal signatures of the training patterns with the temporal signatures of the field parcels. 5 minutes. Field parcels, wherein actually there is a time lag. So dynamic time warping algorithm is the one, if you see, it considers such a kind of warps. Actually, see, if you observe here, it observes the peak in the training one and it's try to match with the peak in the field map. So because the mapping condition may change from parcel to parcel. So this time weighted dynamic time warping algorithm will allow you to consider the seasonal changes and intra-seasonal changes in mapping or providing the maps, the spectral maps. Okay, and later we observed that this is working much better than the Euclidean based classification algorithms, particularly for Indian scenarios where there is a huge diversity or there is a huge shifts in the cultivation periods or the temporal sequences.
And which band data you are predominantly using?
We are using SAR data. Again,
SAR
this is
data,
another
okay.
interesting thing because we initially thought to use the optical bands. Then we observed that again another peculiar problem with Indian scenario is the Kharif season, which is June to November, is a monsoon season.
Yes.
In the monsoon season, you will not get any optical band datasets. For example, Landsat, Sentinel-2, or these images you don't get because
clouding.
your cloud cover will be almost like 20-30% or even higher. When you don't have an image, okay, of an optical, then all your NDVI, UVA, those things doesn't have a meaning for Indian scenario, specifically when you are analyzing Kharif crops. So we use the SAR data sets because SAR data is actually the radio, it's a synthetic aperture radar data set. So it can work even in the Kharif season. That is another.
So basically C band, L band.
Yes, C band. We use the C band data sets. Yes, you're right.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. And in Rabi, have you done any study where this multispectral, this SWIR or NIR is found to be effective?
Yes, in Rabi, yes, it is very effective. But actually, because our objective is actually to work on the irrigation schedules and analyze various management practices, we thought actually using the Sentinel one. Of course, yes, we used in Rabi, the optical based indices are doing very, very good. Excellent.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.
Sure. This is another 18 images what we got, and the conclusions is broad conclusions. Of course, this is actually the crop classified map, and we got almost like if you see the user's accuracy and producer's accuracy, it's mostly almost like close to 70% in the Kharif season. Of course, for many of the cases, you got the accuracy of 90-95 in US and other countries, but here we have many issues. The area of each parcel is so small that actually the boundary pixel effect is actually having major influence on the accuracies. But still the accuracy is almost close to 70%. The overall conclusion is GIS can help in managing large quantities of data sets and excellent in representing spatial parameters, can best use as a post processor for hydrological models, can also be associated with integrated with hydrological models, or can also be used for groundwater applications and agricultural applications. So suggestions, if you want to prosper as a developer, you have to be strong with coding part, particularly with Python, and you should be able to work with other front-end tools for integration, and you should have an expertise in open source GIS platforms like QGIS. If you want to be an application scientist, you have to be strong in using commercial softwares with the strong applications, particularly with using the tools and modeling. Okay, so generally GIS developer tasks or jobs are very good in number nowadays. So this is a very good opportunity for you to get strong with coding part and actually getting familiar with the front end tools and for integration with other open platforms. So with this, actually, I will stop my presentation and thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Phanindra. Are there any questions you can ask, please?
Yeah, one thing, sir, actually, Phanindra, it's a very good presentation, and there is only one question that I have. You mentioned that that remote sensing, information that can be utilized to predict the potentiality of the groundwater in particular location, right?
Yes.
So if this is the case, my point is like I used to, have some kind of field test, like having electrical resistivity methods and other things to find the potentiality of the groundwater in that particular location. So all these tests can be, all these tests that we can avoid, or it can be subsided by using these remote sensing applications. Yeah, because conducting all those electrical resistivity tests and all, it needs some kind of proper investigations, and we need to note down all these recording things and other things at the site level. So is it possible to avoid all these things by using your remote sensing application in terms of identifying the potentiality of the particular location of particular location groundwater availability?
Sir, a good question, actually. So let me explain. Here, the GRACE data, okay, generally the data is available, TSW, terrestrial water storage data is available 1 degree spatial resolution, which is almost at 110 degrees spatial resolution. So the major challenge with that is actually downscaling the terrestrial water storage data set at 110 kilometers to a spatial resolution which is actually good enough for use with hydrological models. So the challenge again is comes in two ways. One is how best I can downscale from 110 to maybe about even 10 or 2 kilometer spatial resolution using a dynamic scaling methods where actually you generally use actually the methodologies conceptually how to downscale or statistical downscaling techniques where you try to see what are the various parameters that are actually affecting at the core scale and try to establish the relations and then try to bring them to the downscale resolution. So point number one. Point number two, we are observing also, of course, from the literature, it is also proved that GRACE is not working effectively in all kinds of hydrological regimes. For example, for alluvial regimes and all, it's working decently good. But for example, for fractured aquifer conditions and all, it's not so accurate. Point number two. So I think it may not be a replacement to field scale testing because the geophysical testings or maybe seismic techniques and all, they provide the groundwater availability or resource distribution in a region at a reasonably better fine scale. But GRACE applications are limited to the core scale resolution.
Further, if I could understood you in your previous reply, sir, you said that GRACE data can be used mostly to track the changes, so as a function of time and not for the total volume estimation. Am I right in that understanding?
Yes, yes. Actually, what GRACE is the only going to give is terrestrial water storage changes. Terrestrial water, because actually it is only giving the changes in the gravity. The changes in the gravity using this Boger algorithms or Boger anomalies, they are converted into the changes in the water storage, terrestrial water storage. Again, the major challenge comes is actually out of the total terrestrial water storage, how we will separate out actually the storage of the canopy water, surface water or soil moisture and all to come up with the groundwater storage, because again this is very similar to our water balance equation where your groundwater storage is considered as a residual of all these components, residual of canopy water or soil moisture and so on. So your groundwater storage anomalies that you are estimating is indirectly also depends on the accuracy of all those parameters. Point number one. And yes, actually, it mainly considers the anomalies because over a longer periods, with respect to the mean, how the changes are happening is what is going to be analyzed with GRACE. Did I answer you properly, sir?
Yeah. Right, Phanindra, because I want to know what is the accuracy of this, GRACE data and all.
Yeah,
because if this gives,
is 110 kilometers, sir.
Yeah,
but
if this gives good accuracy of giving that groundwater results, certainly that we can avoid all these costs incurring for the electrical resistivity methods.
Yes, no, it is gives at 110 degrees. Now the spatial statistical downscaling methods are being applied up to a spatial resolution of about a quarter degree, that which is 25 kilometers and which is further down to about 10 kilometers are being developed, but not much finer for sure.
Yeah. One more thing, Phanindra, You have shown something like ModFlow slide actually. Is it
Nice.
ModFlow software is only dealing with the groundwater issues, or is there any point of adding the surface water as well? Because see, ultimately that we need to meet groundwater where we are having lack of surface water resources actually. So is
Right.
there any model that we can make through this ModFlow by making it like conjective use of groundwater and
Yes,
surface
yes,
water?
sir. Actually, in the ModFlow itself, there are 2-3 packages. One is called SFR, Stream Flow Routing Package, and RCH, Recharge Package, or RIV, River Packages, which generally takes care of the interactions between the stream and the aquifer. And you can also use actually the integrated versions of the ModFlow, like SWAT ModFlow is the one where you can actually simulate the surface hydrological fluxes using SWAT at HRE level, and you can simulate the groundwater fluxes using ModFlow at the grid cell resolution, and then couple to SWAT and ModFlow using the HRU cell linkages. Yes. So
Okay.
dedicated
Okay.
ModFlow packages are all there. All SWAT integration is also available.
Okay, so if that is the case, is it something that we can pick out from the data sets of any of these remote sensing or any kind of other agencies who provides this data, where we can pick out easily? Here is category of groundwater, and here is the category of surface water available areas. All those things. Is it something easily available from any kind of maps? Or do we need to run all these things along with this ModFlow?
I think dedicated to water sheds, I think we may have to run, sir. I think I'm not very sure of the answer, but yes, they may be available.
Okay, and Fanny, one more last question from my end. All these ModFlow softwares and all based on is it something like finite element method or finite difference
No,
method?
finite difference method, and
Okay.
central difference approximation it will consider, sir.
Okay. Okay. Fine. Then thanks, Fanny. It's a good presentation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So GRACE can be used for all geological. Yes, but actually it is working better for alluvial basins actually.
Okay.
Sir, I stop here, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, Phanindra. Thank you very much, Phanindra. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Professor Murali Krishna. Good afternoon.